find ourselves in an interesting time in the Jewish calendar. And so in many ways, I'm not surprised there are fewer people, because there have been an awful lot of holidays and events and everything going on. So this is around the time when I feel like the Jewish community is like ready for, we're like, enough holidays. We're kind of done. We're ready to go back to normal life. We can't keep having all these holidays. It's a little too much at this point. So a question I wanted to open with, and please, if you want to, please share, jump in, just to start thinking about some ideas for our conversation is, can you think of a time when you were at a big event, a big important event that were like, in which you were the focus? So maybe a birthday, a wedding, some big, party, something, where you were the focus. And how did you experience being kind of all caught up in that event? Like, what was that like? What did it feel like? Yeah, Rebecca?
I had a large gathering for my 40th birthday. A lot of family was there. There were pictures of me from the past, and I felt quiet. I felt the need to be quiet. I feel like I kind of withdrew. I mean, I was friendly and kind and grateful, all those kinds of things, but I also felt the need to be quiet within myself.
So there's a lot going on, and it caused you to kind of withdraw a little bit. Okay, great. Yeah. What else? What else do people remember from those kinds of big events? Yeah, Cindy?
Well, I think for me, probably the biggest time was my wedding, when you're surrounded by friends and family who you assume are all supporting your decision and what's going on. It's kind of a life cycle change in your life, where kind of you were going to have this companion, hopefully for the rest of your life, that children then became kind of a next step after that. And it was just like a positive, wonderful moment in my life.
Right. So a feeling of being surrounded by so many people who care about you and are there to support you. But then also
to celebrate with me.
And celebrate with you, right? And also it being part of a larger journey, right? This is sort of a moment, a chapter within a bigger picture for your life as well. Okay, great. Anyone else? Okay, great. So what I was thinking of in particular, so I remember, so I got married last year, and within Jewish tradition, we sort of carve out this time called Yichud. So traditionally, you're under the chuppah, you do the ceremony, all of that, and then you have the reception that comes after. But immediately after the chuppah, after you've married your spouse, the two of you go and are in a room by yourself for, not a very long time, 10, 15, 20 minutes, but just so that the first moments of your life together are not caught up in all of the chaos and all of the swirling and, hugging and kissing all these people and all the energy just kind of being whipped around. But you carve out a little bit of time just to pause and just be together, because I think you can get caught up. I'm thinking about what Rebecca was saying of, almost like needing to withdraw, to like pull back a little bit, because it's just so overwhelming having so many people there. And so I think about those times when like it's full of celebration and people who love you and are there for you for all these occasions. And yet we still need to pause. We kind of need to take a little time to be separate, even within all that joy and all that excitement and all that love surrounding you. So where we are in the Jewish calendar is we've gone through the peak, right? Sort of the peak of the Jewish calendar is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then after that, we immediately have Sukkot, which isn't quite as important, but it's still a Chag, is still an important holiday. And then we go from these 10 days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then a few days after that, we have a week of Sukkot. And then after that, we have Simchat Torah, which is our last final blowout, where we, finish the Torah and then immediately go to the beginning. And so it ends up being a month-long series of holidays and parties and celebration and all of this. And I think it gets to a point where, I shouldn't say, I think Jewish tradition understands that we've kind of gotten to a point where we need a little bit of a pause. We need a little bit of a breath in between. So that is what's called Shmini Atzeret, which is the time that starts this evening at sundown until tomorrow evening at sundown, is this special time called Shmini Atzeret, which is called the 8th day pause. And it's kind of a wonky little feature in our Jewish calendar. But to me, what I think is really interesting is when we pause, when we build in within a month-long party, why do we pause and what do we gain from pausing? And what are the ways that we then fill that pause with something? So I want us to start with the source text hold on one second. I'll share the screen just for a second. So this is the source text of where we get Shmini Atzeret, this holiday, where it comes from, in between like the 8th day of Sukkot, sort of leading into Simchat Torah. So it's like this gap between the two holidays. All right, can folks see the words okay? So this is the source text of where Shmini Atzeret comes from, and how we turn it into a holiday. So it comes from Numbers 29. And this is our Torah portion for the week. We kind of, during Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, we don't have the same normal Parshat in the same way until next week when we come to Bereshit, when we come back to the very beginning. So this is the text. This is our Parsha for really just for today and tomorrow. So it's a great time to just explore this tiny little section. So would someone like to read this paragraph for us?
I'll read, but you can hear the siren in the back or not.
That's okay. You can go for it.
On the 8th day, you shall hold a solemn gathering. You shall not work at your occupations. You shall present a burnt offering, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to, is that Adonai?
Mm-hmm.
One ram, 7 yearling lambs without blemish. The meal offerings and libations for the bull, the ram, and the lambs in the quantities prescribed, and 1 goat for a sin offering, in addition to the regular burnt offering, its meal offering, and libation. All these you shall offer to Adonai at the stated times, in addition to your votive and free will offerings, be they burnt offerings, meal offerings, libations, or offerings of well-being. So Moses spoke to the Israelites just as Adonai had commanded Moses.
Great, thank you. So where this is saying, where it's opening on the 8th day, you shall hold. So this is, they've just talked about for 7 days, you will celebrate Sukkot. And then this is the next verse. On the 8th day, you shall hold a solemn gathering. So what does this, just from the source, right? Just from the very origins, what does it seem like this day is about? What is it meant for? Do you want to raise a hand, or Penina, you wanted to say something? Mm-hmm.
Okay. We think it's a pause to separate Simchat Torah from Sukkot. But because Simchat Torah is supposed to be such an important holiday, and it's only going to get the 1 day, this day of preparation is supposed to kind of emphasize that it is the most important part of the thing, of this whole package of the Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, and then Simchat Torah. The receiving of the Torah, the taking the responsibility of the 10 Commandments, was an extremely important part. So this whole Shmini Atzeret is like to emphasize the day that comes after. So you pause with this whole business of Sukkot and this whole preparation of offerings. It's to welcome the receiving of the Torah all over again.
Well,
That's how I explain it.
Yes. Well, so
because
it's
the word actually means Shmini Atzeret. It's the 8th day that's going to put a pause. That's it.
Right. So it's interesting, right? That if we understand this to be, is it a time of preparation?
Exactly. It's like, yes, the
time
anticipation of getting the Torah all over again. The importance of the Torah to make it so special, so it shouldn't be an attachment to the Sukkot. So you give this day to give the Simchat Torah the importance that it needs on its own.
So
the honor that it needs on its own.
So interesting, right? So I think that's one way of understanding. And I think at the beginning, right, when we first get this commandment, and I think this is an important specification. So it's interesting that it gets translated here as a solemn gathering, when what it says in the Hebrew, B'yom Hashmini Atzeret,
it's just going to be a pause. Just a pause. That's
right.
It.
So yes. So it's saying, right, on the 8th day, you're going to have a pause.
That's it.
And so, right. So it's interesting that it then gets turned into a solemn gathering.
All the sacrifices and all the stuff
hold on, Panina. Yeah. Hold on. I want to open it up to the rest of the group. So yeah, thank you. What else are folks noticing? What does it seem like we're being asked to do, or how is this day being set up from this text? Cindy. Mm-hmm.
Obviously a lot of sacrifices, which to me always feel like it's a way for the priest to get food, because God isn't going to eat it.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is a time, it's interesting, before this section in Numbers is it's also, never mind, I take it back out. But part of the Torah portion that we read for Shmini Atzeret is a part of Deuteronomy, where it's talking about when you come to do your pilgrimage, when you come to make the offerings at the temple in Jerusalem, to not forget the Levites, to not forget the priests. So it's making sure that when everyone is bringing their crops and their produce and their animals, that's how the priests were able to survive, right, is by the donations of the rest of the people. So you're right. So it's definitely carving out a time to say, make sure that this is a time to take care of the needs of the priesthood. Great. What else? What else might be going on here, or what are you noticing?
What stood out for me was that last week we were talking about Sukkot and how Sukkot is a joyous celebration associated with joy, but here in the first sentence it says solemn.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden you have to take yourself from that uplifting, joyous moment and come into a more solemn, quiet preparation, as you said.
Exactly. So I think, and it's interesting too, right? So solemn gathering is an interpretation more than it is a literal translation.
That's it. It's not in the Hebrew context. It's only in the English. It's not solemn. It's just the 8th day that's going to stop the celebration of Sukkot, get prepared for Simchat Torah, which is very important, and all the sacrifices is in order to welcome and honor the next day that comes, the Simchat Torah.
So I think, right, so when we're thinking of this pause, right, a time to sort of pull back. Oh, Susan, you have a hand raised.
Yes, I think this raised a really good question. How did it get to solemn gathering? And I thought that Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah was supposed to be a festive and enjoyable time when we're supposed to be thankful for what we have. This is how the Jews suffered, the Israelites in the desert. So why was it translated English to solemn? Was it was it because of all the sacrifices you're going to be making, and you should think about I don't know, you can list various offerings. They're not just one, votive offerings, free will, and the like. And I thought Cindy raised a good question about feeding the Levites. But then the question is, why was the translation from festive to solemn?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm honestly not sure. And I think it's one of those times when the Hebrew really helps us notice, right? You're like, what are we trying to get at here? But I do wonder, like, I think there is also the main emphasis. I mean, the whole word is there's a pause. There's a time to sort of take a breath, and sort of to me, I sort of think of a pause, a breath, as we're just kind of like letting something go, we're settling, we're just taking a beat until we move into the next thing. And so maybe the understanding is, oh, that's a solemn kind of moment between the joys of Sukkot and Simchat Torah, but but in the practice of Shmini Atzeret, it's not really meant to be a solemn one, although we will get to part of how that time gets filled. There's one hand that was raised. I'm
Yeah.
yeah.
Rabbi, that would be me,
Okay.
Lorraine.
Oh,
So I wanted to comment on that because although the text describes it as a pause, and we are talking about solemnity, I do think that the description and the actions do not involve a pause. There's the actual sacrifice is not passive at all because it involves a lot of work. It's I would assume it's very laborious. And then preparing all of that over the course of several days to then lead up to a celebration. It just doesn't seem quite like the pause that traditionally you think about when you're thinking you're just pausing and resting from a long string of activity. I don't know. I
yeah,
just
exactly.
think it's a contrast in there.
Yeah, exactly. They're describing schlepping a bull and a lamb and a ram and 7 lamb. Like that's not easy work. That's going to take some effort. Yeah, absolutely. So maybe there's the seriousness of that. Brad, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, it begins by sounding like the day is somewhat special. And then we get to verse 39, where we talk about these offerings being in addition to your votive and free will offerings, your burnt offerings, meal offerings, libations, etc. So it seems like at the same time as the day is somewhat special, we're segueing back into our regular types of activities and moving back into, after a period of very special events, moving back into everyday life.
Exactly, right. We have to, we can't be in Chag mode forever, right? We have to get back to work at some point, right? So a transition, a sort of beginning of the transition. This is something that I say in Judaism, we begin to end, right? We never just end. We have to sort of we have to prepare to end and move on. And so that's kind of maybe what this time is doing, is it's getting us ready for that. Daphne, you want to add something?
I had a question about the historical or agricultural history relative to this holiday, because I know Sukkot was one of the regalim when people traveled, and it was a big deal to take their orphans and their donkeys and, the widows and everybody and march to Jerusalem and then have this huge party and sacrifice. And then is this kind of like you returned home from your trip and now you have to unpack your bags and kind of take off your party hat and then do something serious as opposed to just having like a big sleepover party?
So that is a great question, and you have perfectly segued into my next text. So when we think, whenever you're trying to figure out what a text mean, usually Rashi is able to help us out a little bit. So I'm going to go to Rashi, who's this, medieval commentator, who gives very helpful. I'm sure you all in this class have seen some Rashi before. And he's kind of is explaining like just that question of like, what exactly are they doing? Why are they doing it? What's happening here, given that they've just there's just been this huge pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So this is Rashi's commentary on that text. Does anyone want to read? I think Ellen, you had wanted to read before. She-
I'll read if no one else.
Okay, great. Thank you.
On the 8th day, there should be a restriction for you. Restricted in the doing of work. Another explanation of
Atzeret. Mhm.
Oh, because they're,
uh,
wait,
restrict yourself from leaving Jerusalem. This teaches that this 8th day requires that they should remain in Jerusalem overnight, that the pilgrims should not immediately at the termination of the 7th day begin their homeward journey. And an explanation of it in the Agada is because on all the 7 days of the festival, they offered sacrifices corresponding number to the 70 nations of the world. And they proposed then to set forth on their way home. The omnipresent says to them, I beg of you, make a small banquet for me, so that I may have some pleasure from you exclusively.
Perfect. So this is right. So this is meant to be a time you've made your big schlep for Sukkot to the temple all the way to Jerusalem, and you've done your 7 days. And then we know, Simchat Torah comes next. But even although at that time, Simchat Torah was probably later than antiquity. But at this is a time of saying, God is saying, you've made it all the way here. You've made it to my home. You've made it home with me. Don't go home yet. And it makes me think of when I would go to visit, my parents from college, when, I'd be home for Thanksgiving or winter break, and it'd be the day before I was supposed to leave. And, my mom or dad would say, why don't you delay your flight? Why don't you go back the next day? Why don't you catch a later flight? We're having such a nice time here. We're spending such great time together. Just stay a little longer. Just hang out here in the home with me for a little bit longer. Yeah. Piniana, you have a hand raised? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The pilgrimage was done after the temple was already built. This portion about the day, the Simchat Torah, it's given to them before the temple is even built. They're about to enter the land again. We are losing this perspective of where they are when they're getting it. This is what to do once they're in, but they are not in yet. They're about to go in. So telling them to be solemn, it's because they have to remember the Torah once they go in there, because there is other nations living there. So this whole anticipation of the sacrifices is to remind them that this thing that they are going to carry, these 10 commandments, this is a very important solemn thing. They have to think about it, and they have to follow it, and they have to keep it. We are talking explanations that were written years after the temple was destroyed already or built.
So I think, right. So this is, so as
we are mixing the times with the understanding of what's going on. Exactly. The solemn is supposed to be because the receiving of the Torah is the focal point right now. All the rest has to do with the land once they're already in there. They're not even in, they're about to go in. So this is the thing that we have to remember when we try to explain this part. Receiving the Torah is more important than the whole Sukkot.
I hear you. So I think that also this, as we're trying to understand, and I think Rashi comes from a time, and as we do today, when we're trying to understand what is the importance for us now, given the circumstances that we're in.
Even then.
And so I think that, right. So in this case, if we want to think about, this was a time to sort of stay and remain and be close together, be in community, have the people all together, having gone so far and just to journey together, to get to be together in Jerusalem, to be at the temple, to be making these offerings. God says, don't leave just yet. Just stay for a little banquet with me, hang out with me exclusively. And I think this word exclusively is really interesting. So I want to go to, so Rashi then goes to, so that's an explanation for the first line. And so now this is his interpretation about all the animals that are being given for sacrifice, that sort of comes back to this exclusively with me idea. Does anyone want to read this section?
I will. Ellen
Okay.
will.
Go for it.
one bullock, one ram. These are an allusion to Israel, who form one nation. Stay with me a little longer. And this conveys the idea of God's affection for Israel, just like children who think to take leave of their father, to whom he says, parting from you is very hard to me. Stay one more day. A parable. It may be compared to the case of a king who made a banquet, etc., as it related to Treatise Sukkah 55b. And in the Midrash of Ar Tachumah 4:8:17, it states, the Torah teaches you a rule of conduct, that he who has a stranger staying with him should give him on the first day fattening.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. The Torah teaches you a rule of conduct, that he who has a stranger staying with him should give him on the first day fattening poultry to eat. On the morrow, he should give him fish to eat. On the next day, animal flesh. On the following day, he should give him pulse to eat. And on the next day, vegetables, diminishing gradually, just as was the case with the bullocks on the Feast of Tabernacles.
Great. So
What
this
is pulse?
pulse, I'm not sure, but I'm imagining some kind of like stew, so like something that's not quite as, it's diminishing each day, of some kind of
From being shepherds into land workers, into farmers.
so no,
Turning from shepherds, from nomads into a nation.
So
of
not
farmers.
quite. So this is trying to say that, so first, so there's a couple ideas here. So the first, Rashi is picking back up on this idea of, as one nation, stay here a little longer, be here with me together. There was a source I thought that I had pulled in here, but maybe I, right. So so that kind of goes back to the idea of all the other days were sacrifices for these other nations, but now is a time just for us, just for, God and the people of Israel, the two, right? Like the pair, right? To spend time together, not thinking about other peoples, thinking about other things, just being here and, stay a little longer. Don't leave just yet. And so then the second thing is this idea of, it sort of goes back to, the, as I would call it, the Jewish goodbye of saying goodbye without actually leaving, that it's this extended. Have you ever been to a party where you spend about 45 minutes saying goodbye to everyone? You keep saying, oh, I'm leaving. But then you see someone and you have to catch up and you have to hug, right? So this kind of idea of you're trying to move your guest out, but you're not going to just send them away. You're going to slowly bring down, here's, we're serving you the nicest thing the first day, and then the second nice thing, and then the third, and you're kind of weaning them off this really generous hospitality. So that's Rashi's interpretation of what these sacrifices are as well, to kind of, wean God off of, right? Like we're all sort of moving away from this really sacred, special, unique, holy time back to our normal lives that we have to get back to eventually. So this gives us, so to me, when we think about what are we doing during this pause, like what is the purpose? What's the reason of this Atzeret, of this 8th day pause? One is to have exclusivity with God. If we want to think back to the temple in ancient times, to have this exclusive time, just to hang around a little bit, just to be together a little bit more before you're going to leave, because you're going to have to go back to your normal life after this. So it's a time sort of like to say an extended goodbye and transition back into normal time. So that's one way that we might think about what this pause is about. So another important thing, there are several transitions that happen on Shmini Atzeret that we go from one time of the year to the next. The other is that after Shmini Atzeret, we change the blessings in the Amidah to start praying for rain. So during the summer, so from Passover to Shmini Atzeret, you say the blessing for dew. And then from Shmini Atzeret to Passover, you say the blessing for rain. Because this is the harvest time, right? It's the fall. You want to bring in the fall and winter rains everything to grow and to start blossoming in the springtime. So you start making the blessings for rain at this time. So if we want to go to, well, then this was a text just sort of talking about who all was here at the festival, but we touched on this a little bit. It is an ingathering for all of the people, your son, your daughter, your male and female slaves, the Levite, the priest, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow. Everyone comes together for these sacred holidays. So it really was an ingathering of everyone, everybody coming together for these sacred occasions. So there's an interesting story about rain in the Mishnah and then also the Talmud about this man named Honi, the circle maker. So rain was really a very in the ancient times, in the ancient world, in like an agricultural system, rain was both really necessary. You really need the rain, but also a danger because of flooding, because of like the difficulties that might come from heavy rains as well. So as we're starting to pray for the rain, I just wanted to share this interesting story to think a little bit about during this transition, right? Like we're filling this pause with these blessings for rain, and what does that mean, and what does that look like in Jewish tradition? So would someone like to read the story of Honi Agel, who's like Honi the circle maker? It's just English. I promise it's easy.
I'll read again.
Okay.
The Mishnah adds, in general, they cry out on account of any trouble that should not befall the community, a euphemism for trouble that may befall the community, except for an overabundance of rain. Although too much rain may be disastrous, one does not cry out over it because rain is a sign of a blessing. The Mishnah relates an accident occurred in which the people said to Honi Agel, pray that rain should fall. He said to them, go out and bring in the clay ovens used to roast the paschal lambs so that they will not dissolve in the water as the torrential rains are certain to fall. He prayed and no rain fell at all. What did he do? He drew a circle on the ground and stood inside of it and said before God, Master of the universe, your children have turned their faces towards me as I am like a member of your household. Therefore, I take an oath by your great name that I will not move from here until you have mercy upon your children and answer their prayers for rain.
Hold on, I'm gonna scroll up.
Rain began to trickle down, but only in small droplets. He said, I did not ask for this, but for rain to fill the cisterns, ditches, and caves with enough water to last the entire year. Rain began to fall furiously. He said, I did not ask for this damaging rain either, but for rain of benevolence, blessing, and generosity. Subsequently, the rains fell in their standard manner, but continued unabated, filling the city with water until all the Jews exited the residential areas of Jerusalem and went to the Temple Mount due to the rain. They came and said to him, just as you prayed over the rains that they should fall, so too pray that they should stop. He said to them, go out and see if the claimant's stone, a large stone located in the city, upon which proclamation would be posted with regard to lost and found articles, has been washed away. In other words, if the water has not obliterated the claimant's stone, it is not yet appropriate to pray for the rain to cease.
Hold on, I'm going to scroll up.
Shimon ben Shattah, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin at the time, relayed to Honi Agel, were you not Honi? I have decreed that you be ostracized, but what can I do to you? You nag God and he does your bidding or biting, like a son who nags his father and his father does his biting without reprimand. After all, rain fell as you requested. About you, the verse states, Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice.
Great. And that also interesting, that line from Proverbs is also that's part of the baby naming blessing that we do today. It's part of when you give, a Jewish child who's being named in like the formal naming blessing, that line is part of it. So it's interesting, very connected to parenthood and children. So what do we make of this story? It's kind of a wonky story. So what seems to be happening here? If you were going to explain it in your own words, what's happening here?
Well, first, who wrote this?
So this is from the Mishnah,
Okay.
which means it was it was put together around 200 CE. So this story probably comes from, somewhere between 2nd century BCE, 1st century CE.
Well, it's saying pray, but don't pray too much. But then you need to pray again to make sure that you have enough. But then you have to check something to make sure that you've prayed enough so that the claimant stone does what it's supposed to be doing. It's a back and forth. It's confusing. It's a back and forth. Pray, don't pray. Pray, pray, don't pray.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a back and forth with God. It's someone who's praying and asking for something and is saying, no, God, that's not what I asked for. And God seems to be trying. Susan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, on the surface level, it's like moderation, which Maimonides would say, too much. This may be good, too much is bad. And this is good, too much is bad. But the back and forth and the last line it leaves me a little puzzled as well. He's like a son who nags his father. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice. That's the mother. So that I don't get. But I get this is one thing for moderation, too much of anything, which we're discovering in California with too much of the drought and then too much rain. You want things in moderation. And Honey didn't put a stipulation on that. He just said, give me this, and God, being the father, wants to satisfy and gives him too much of everything. So, but I don't get the last line.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because Honi is understood to be this not like mythical, but this character who he got to cross the lines that nobody else did. Right. And that's why Shimon ben Shetach says, he's sort of like the head rabbi, let's say at the time. He said, if you weren't if you were anybody else but you who did this, you would be ostracized, because here are you bickering with demanding of God the minutia of how it's going to rain. Like anyone else, that's not appropriate, that's not acceptable. But you, God seems to let you nag and does what you say. So you get off the hook. It's very curious. Penina, you wanted to add something?
The fact that he made God his God, and the fact that he acknowledges that there is a God. So that's the point that's why it says, let your mother be glad and your father be glad. It's the whole idea. Again, we're going back to the acceptance of monotheism and the set of laws that God gave us, that we will receive, in the desert. The fact that he's arguing with God, he acknowledges that there is a God. That's what they need. They need this acknowledgement, this connection. If you make it your God, your personal God, it's even better, because then you're more, how would I say, you'll serve the mitzvot better, or you'll do it out of love and understanding, that you could ask for things or pray for things. Sometimes you'll get them, sometimes you won't, but at least you acknowledge that there is a higher power. And I think this is why they say your mother should be glad, your father's, and your mother, blah, blah, blah. So that's why he became such a personality to talk about, because it was his belief in God.
Yeah, Brad, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, like Susan, I'm very puzzled by that last sentence. It doesn't seem to follow. But what it seems to be raising to me is a question about prayer. What is prayer? What should prayer be all about? Should prayer be asking for things, or should prayer be instead thanking for
Both.
the things that we get? Because here, asking for things, I mean, be careful of what you ask for, because you might get it, and it might not exactly be what you really want or need. So there seems to be a warning here about prayer, and and questioning the nature of prayer.
Exactly. And I think, and that's a really important point that we see throughout like Jewish texts, Jewish history, there's these instances of we see different kinds of prayer in different moments, that there's times when prayer is like gratitude and awe and supplication. And then there's also times where prayer is rebuke. Prayer is demanding. Prayer is really saying, hey, God, like this, there's something here that's not right, and I need you to focus on it. And I think in certain ways, rain, because of how crucial it was to survive, but also needing to be within a certain range, crucial and like deadly at the same time. I think the ancient rabbis, prayers about rain actually really reflect a lot of these tensions and anxieties that they have of, you want to pray for what you need, but you just don't quite know exactly what you're going to get. So you really have to be mindful of that. So it's not necessarily giving us an answer of anything, but I think it reflects that tension that you're noticing. Yeah, Rebecca, you want to say something?
I decided the last line makes a lot of sense, because Honi was special. He was able to talk to God like no other person was able to. And Shimon ben Shatta recognized this and said, even though you nagged God and you did it this way or that way, wow, you talked to God, and your parents should be proud of you. And they should rejoice for who you are, because you did bring it in the end.
Exactly. And I think what they're trying, the connection there they're trying to say is, Honi gets away with nagging God the same way a favorite child, not that anyone ever has, no parent has a favorite child, we all love our children equally, but there's the child who can like nudge a little, who can get a little bit more, get away with a few more things. So Honi seems to have that kind of relationship with God, who's, all of our parents, but they're, someone like Honi has a little more leeway. So I think that's the connection they're trying to draw, is Honi has this special relationship, seems to have this special relationship with God that reflects, the joy of, let your father and your mother be glad and rejoice, like really loving a child. And I think as well, during Sukkot and during all the high holidays, we've been doing so much prayer and so much petitioning, right, and atoning and all of this. And so I think it's interesting that rain comes into this pause, right? This time when we've been very up in God's face about all sorts of things. And then in the pause where we're about to go back into our normal life, we make sure to say, oh, and don't forget the rain. We're really going to need the rain as well. Which to me, I think is a really interesting connection. All right, thanks for joining, Lorraine. I think she's still on.
The question too. You're including this with the Shmini Atzeret. So you don't want rain when all the pilgrims are coming to Jerusalem, or maybe you do, but everyone will get soaked. So why is it here? Is it because that we've just got through with this agricultural holiday, and then we want to pray for rain for the coming season? Is that what it is? That we're really focused on agriculture here?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. We've finished, the fall, the final harvest, the last of the crop that we planted last year has made it in. We're getting ready to hunker down for winter, right? Like that's what Sukkot is all about. And so now we're shifting into this next year and this next cycle. So this is when, you want the rains to come, you want the November to February rains to come in. And yes, as one of my liturgy professors in rabbinical school taught it, that you don't want to start praying for rain because the pilgrims will get wet.
Yeah.
And you don't want that. You don't want wet people, in soggy clothes.
So
Certainly not in the ancient world.
it's rain at the proper time and enough of rain, because rain at an improper time is not helpful. So
Exactly. So that's so this pause is the time when we start to say, okay, we've moved past this cycle and now we're moving into the next. It's time for the next rains. It's time for the next cycle to begin. So I want to go to I want to be mindful of the time. So one last thing that I wanted us to look at as well. So another important thing that we do during Shmini Atzeret is Yizkor, right? We have the Yizkor service on Yom Kippur, on Shmini Atzeret, on Passover, and on Shavuot for all the pilgrimage festivals. So this is a time when we, remember our loved ones, and during this pause, we carve out the time to remember the people that, would have been gathered together, would have been coming in for all of the festivals and all of the celebrating. But I think sometimes when everyone comes together is when you really notice who's missing and who was here last year, who was here 10 years ago that we're not seeing and we're thinking of them. So I just wanted to look at the Yizkor prayer just to think a little bit as well about, how do we carve out that time for Yizkor during this pause as well? Would anyone like to read the Yizkor prayer?
well, I'll read it again. Read again if anyone else wants to. Remember God, the soul of my grandmothers and grandfathers and grandmothers, literally male and female elders, my uncles and aunts, my brothers and sisters, my husband and my wife, the name of the departed son or daughter.
Sorry, I apologize. So this is where you would fill in with that person's name.
Yeah, you put it, or
Mhm.
the name of his or her father who went to his world, because I will, without making a vow, give charity for him. In recompense for this, let his or her soul be bound with the binding of life with God, with the soul of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and with other righteous men and women in the Garden of Eden. And let us say, Amen.
So this is the official Yizkor prayer that we say to remember our loved ones during this time. So what does it mean that when we pause, we fill that time with remembrance? What does that mean for us?
Wait, Rabbi, I'm a little bit confused.
Okay.
This isn't the typical Yizkor prayer, is it? Is this a special Yizkor prayer that's said on this particular day for this particular holiday?
So the Yizkor, so during the Yizkor service, right, which is done 4 times a year on Yom Kippur and Shmini Atzeret and all this. So this is the sort of this is the prayer that gives the service its name, but this is the traditional prayer that you would say during those services. But it's as different from Mourner's Kaddish, which is the prayer that we say to mark the death at the end of prayer. So this is a specific prayer that we say during these particular services.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What does the prayer ask us to do?
I see kind of for the give to charity if you want your ancestors to have a good afterlife.
Yeah, so charity, right, giving, so like legacy donations, right, in honor of them, in remembrance of them, giving to charity.
But it also implies if you don't give, they might not have a good afterlife.
Yeah. Okay, it does in a way. But also, we know the importance of, like, I think of, when we like the Unatana Tokef prayer, when we say, Teshuvah, Tefillah, Tzedakah, right? The things that make us go through life in a way that makes life less painful and challenging. Tzedakah, right? Charitable giving is one of the key ways that we do that. But yeah, but there is that's definitely reflected. Rebecca, you wanted to say something? Mm-hmm.
I don't know much about other religions, but one of the things that I really like about Judaism is the community prayers for Yizkor, for Kaddish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, right, like as everyone is gathered together, like what are the things that we can take advantage of when everyone is gathered together is by remembering the people that we love, who we've lost. Yeah, absolutely. Brad, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, I'm puzzled by this return to the Garden of Eden at the end, because I thought that was not a Jewish concept, the idea of returning to Eden, recapturing Eden, that we were moving forwards, not backwards.
Exactly. So there is this idea that like Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, it's not necessarily literal here. It just means like, the afterlife, the world to come is like the Garden of Eden was like that, right? So it's not that we're going back to that place and time, but we're going to, the world that comes after life, which is beautiful and peaceful, like the Garden of Eden. But that's a good question. Susan?
And I like that Brad brought that up, because I would have thought they would have said in Olam Haba, which would be more appropriate, I think. But I do know that Garden of Eden is a qualifier for Olam Haba. But it was interesting here that they add, without making a vow. We just got through with releasing us from the vow, like, I'm going to do this, but I'm not vowing to do this. So if I fall short, I don't have to go without hate on Yom Kippur. But I like the idea of the souls coming together, and even having this after we have all of this material things. The Sukkot is material, and even historical. You have to build it there. The leaves and and you're sitting in it. That's material too. And then coming and bringing the sacrifices. All of that is bound up with the actual here and now in the world. And then this gives us some sense of an afterlife. And the soul, which is not material, it is pure spiritual, not even like the sacrifices in the temple. I like that.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, right? That Sukkot is very much about the physical and the being present and the doing in the world and the tangible stuff. But it still reminds us, like it's also the soul, and it's also these things that are not just present in the here and now, but the things that are eternal, the things that are to come. Beautiful. That's a beautiful interpretation. Penina, you wanted to say something?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They say here to remember the generations before you. The whole idea is again to remind them that they're a member of people, and we, the people, believe in this one God, and that's why they mentioned Gan Eden, because that was the beginning. When you mention your parents or your grandparents, it's like a declaration that you acknowledge that you're a member of this particular congregation or a nation that believes in the one God that gave you life and can take it away. And that's why they're mentioning the Garden of Eden, because that was the beginning of creation of mankind.
Mm-hmm. Right.
My interpretation, it's remember who you are, remember who is your people, who are your people, remember who is your God. This is it.
Exactly, right. That things like death, the things that are out of our hands, out of our control, it always brings us back to the bigger perspective of life, of God, of everything. Yeah. And I think that's helpful as we, you know, I think about during sort of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So the shift that people will talk about, so Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is very internal, right? It's all reflecting and processing and repairing, repenting. It's a very internal process. And then we switch to Sukkot, very external, very physical, very tangible, very doing. And I think that when we have this pause and we do Yizkor, it reminds us, it kind of shifts us. We've kind of done two extremes, and it kind of brings us back to this middle of, you know, we've just done the sukkah, we've done the repairing, but we also have to remember the eternal and the big picture around us as we move forward into this next cycle, into this next year. So thank you everybody for taking the time to be here today. It was really wonderful learning with you, learning from you. And I hope that this holiday, this Shabbat, is a time of a pause to appreciate the blessings and the coming year and all the things that are sacred and eternal in our lives. I hope that it's a nice holiday for you all.
Thank you. Thank you so
Shabbat
much.
shalom.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.